Behind the gilded gates of Kensington Palace, a routine family day turned into a nightmare that would expose a web of negligence, cover-ups, and shocking betrayals within the royal household. When 10-year-old Prince George's screams echoed through the palace corridors, it wasn't just a broken arm that shattered. It was the facade of perfect royal protection. What the royal family discovered next would lead to immediate dismissals, criminal investigations, and Prince William's unprecedented demand for complete custody reform. This is the untold story of how one tragic accident revealed the dangerous cracks in the world's most protected family. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Kensington Palace as Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews adjusted her radio and stepped through the ornate entrance. She had been summoned at dawn with a message that chilled even her experienced nerves. Royal child injured. Suspicious circumstances, immediate investigation required. As the head of the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Unit, Matthews had seen her share of incidents, but nothing had prepared her for what she would uncover in the coming days. Prince George had been rushed to the private wing of St. Mary's Hospital in the early hours of Tuesday morning, his left arm fractured in what initially appeared to be a playground accident. The official statement released to the press was brief and carefully worded. His Royal Highness Prince George sustained a minor injury during recreational activities and is receiving excellent medical care. But behind the palace walls, a very different story was beginning to emerge. Matthews made her way through the corridors she knew so well, past portraits of long-dead monarchs and beneath crystal chandeliers that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. Her destination was the blue drawing room where Prince William waited with expression she had never seen before, a mixture of fury, heartbreak, and determination that spoke of a father pushed beyond his limits. "Inspector Matthews," William's voice was steady, but she could hear the tremor of controlled emotion beneath the formal greeting. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I'm afraid what we initially thought was an accident has revealed some very disturbing truths about the people we trusted to protect our son." The prince gestured to a leather chair across from the ornate desk where he had been pacing moments before. As Matthews settled herself, she noticed the scattered papers, the cold cup of tea, and the telltale signs of a man who had not slept. This was not the composed royal she was accustomed to seeing at official functions. "Tell me everything, Your Royal Highness," Matthews said, her notebook ready. "Start from the beginning." William's jaw tightened as he began his account. "George was playing in the private gardens yesterday afternoon. Catherine was in London for her charity engagement, and I was in meetings with my staff. The children were supposed to be supervised by their nanny, Miss Patricia Caldwell, and protected by our usual security detail." He paused, his hands clenched into fists. But that's where the story begins to fall apart. Matthews had known Patricia Caldwell for 3 years. The 42-year-old nanny had impeccable credentials, having worked for several high-profile families before joining the royal household. Her background checks had been thorough, her references sterling, and her dedication to the royal children apparent. The idea that she might be involved in something sinister seemed almost impossible. "What exactly happened to Prince George?" Matthews asked, her pen hovering over the page. "According to the initial report from our head of security, David Morrison, George fell from the climbing frame in the adventure playground," William replied, his voice growing harder with each word. "Morrison claimed he heard George cry out, rushed over, and found him on the ground with his arm clearly injured. He immediately called for medical assistance and notified me." Matthews nodded, making notes. "That sounds like proper protocol. What raised your suspicions?" William stood and walked to the tall windows overlooking the gardens where his son had been injured. "George is a careful child, Inspector. He's been using that climbing frame for 2 years without incident. But more importantly, when I spoke to him in the hospital, his account of what happened didn't match Morrison's report." The weight of those words settled in the room like a physical presence. Matthews felt the familiar tingle of a case that was about to become far more complex than it initially appeared. "What did Prince George tell you?" "He said he wasn't alone when he fell." William turned back to face her, his eyes bright with unshed tears and barely contained anger. "He said there were grown-ups playing a game with him, encouraging him to climb higher than he usually would. He said someone was supposed to catch him, but they were looking at their phone instead." Matthews felt her stomach tighten. "Who were these adults?" "That's what I need you to find out." William's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because according to Morrison's official report, no one else was in the garden area when the accident occurred. Either my 10-year-old son is lying, or there's been a deliberate cover-up of what really happened." The implications were staggering. If Prince George's account was accurate, it meant that members of the royal household had not only been negligent in their duties, but had also conspired to hide the truth from his parents. Matthews had investigated crimes against the royal family before, but never one that might involve trusted insiders. "Your Royal Highness, I need to ask some difficult questions," Matthews said carefully. "Have there been any concerns about Miss Caldwell's behaviour recently? Any changes in her routine or demeanour?" William returned to his chair, his movements heavy with exhaustion. "That's what makes this so troubling, Inspector. Patricia has been exemplary. The children adore her, she's never given us cause for concern, and her dedication has been above reproach. If she's involved in what happened to George, then either we've been completely blind to her true nature, or there are factors at play that we don't understand." Matthews made more notes, her mind already working through the investigative steps that would need to be taken. "What about the security detail? You mentioned David Morrison specifically." "Morrison has been with us for 5 years," William replied. "He came highly recommended from the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Unit. His record is spotless, his loyalty unquestioned. Until now." The prince paused, rubbing his temples. "Inspector, I need you to understand the position I'm in. These people live in our home. They have access to our children. They know our most private moments. If we can't trust them, then my family is in danger every single day." The full scope of the investigation was becoming clear to Matthews. This wasn't just about a child's broken arm, it was about the fundamental security of the royal family. If trusted insiders were willing to endanger Prince George and then lie about it, what else might they be capable of? "I'll need to interview everyone who was on duty yesterday," Matthews said. "The nanny, the security team, the household staff, gardeners, anyone who might have seen what happened." "You have my full authorization," William replied immediately. "No one is off limits. I want answers, Inspector, and I want them quickly. My son is lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm because someone we trusted failed in their duty. I will not allow that to happen again." Matthews closed her notebook and stood. "Your Royal Highness, I should warn you that investigations like this can uncover uncomfortable truths. Are you prepared for the possibility that people you've trusted might have betrayed that trust?" William's expression hardened into something that reminded Matthews why his family had ruled for over 1,000 years. "Inspector, someone hurt my child and then lied about it. I am prepared for whatever justice requires." As Matthews left the palace, her mind was already working through the complexities of the case ahead. She had no way of knowing that her investigation would ultimately expose a network of negligence and deception that reached far beyond a simple playground accident. The broken arm of one 10-year-old prince was about to shatter the carefully constructed world of royal protection forever. The first interviews would begin within hours, and with each conversation, the truth would become more disturbing and the implications more far-reaching. By the time Matthews finished her work, several careers would be destroyed, criminal charges would be filed, and Prince William would be forced to make decisions that would fundamentally change how the royal family protected their most precious assets, their children. But as she drove away from Kensington Palace that morning, Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews could not have imagined just how deep the betrayal ran, or how many people had failed in their most sacred duty, keeping the future king safe from harm. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews returned to Kensington Palace the following morning, with a team of investigators and a growing sense of unease. Her preliminary interviews had revealed troubling inconsistencies in the accounts of what happened to Prince George, and she suspected that the full truth was still hidden beneath layers of loyalty, fear, and deliberate deception. Her first interview of the day was with Patricia Caldwell, the royal nanny who had been responsible for Prince George at the time of his injury. Matthews had arranged to meet in the palace's library, a neutral space away from the children's quarters, where Caldwell might feel more comfortable speaking freely. Patricia Caldwell entered the room with the composed demeanour that had made her so valued by the royal family. At 42, she possessed the kind of calm authority that comes from years of managing high-profile households. Her grey hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her clothing was immaculately pressed despite the stress of the previous 2 days. "Miss Caldwell, thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Matthews began, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I understand this is a difficult time, but I need to ask you some detailed questions about Tuesday afternoon."
"Of course, Inspector," Caldwell replied, her voice steady.
"I want to help in any way possible. Prince George is like my own child. The thought that he was hurt while in my care is devastating." Matthews studied the nanny's face carefully. "Where exactly were you when Prince George was injured?" "I was in the children's study, preparing Princess Charlotte's afternoon lessons," Caldwell answered without hesitation. Prince George had asked permission to play in the garden, and I granted it because the weather was lovely and he had completed his morning work. Was anyone else supervising him in the garden? A slight pause. The security detail was aware of his location. That's always the protocol when the children are playing outside. Matthews made a note.
Did you hear the accident happen?
I heard George cry out. Caldwell's composure wavered slightly. It was the kind of sound that every caregiver dreads. You know instantly that something is terribly wrong.
I ran outside immediately and found him on the ground beside the climbing frame, clutching his arm. Who else was there when you arrived? David Morrison from security was already with George, trying to comfort him. Morrison said he had been doing his perimeter check when he heard the cry. Matthews leaned forward. Miss Caldwell, Prince George has told his father that there were other adults in the garden with him before he fell, adults who were encouraging him to climb higher than usual. Do you have any knowledge of this? The change in Patricia Caldwell was subtle but unmistakable. The color drained from her face, and her hands, which had been resting calmly in her lap, began to fidget with the fabric of her skirt. I'm not sure what George might have meant by that. He was in considerable pain, and children sometimes remember things differently when they're upset. So you're saying Prince George was mistaken? Caldwell was quiet for a long moment, her internal struggle visible in the tension around her eyes. Inspector, I love that boy like my own son. I would never do anything to put him in harm's way. Matthews noticed that Caldwell had not actually answered the question. Miss Caldwell, I need you to be completely honest with me. Were there other adults in the garden with Prince George before his accident? The nanny's composure finally cracked. Inspector, there are things about working in this household that you might not understand. Pressures and expectations that go beyond simply caring for the children. What kind of pressures? Caldwell stood and walked to the window, her back to Matthews. Have you ever worked for people who expect perfection every single day, where the smallest mistake could end not just your career, but your entire life as you know it?
Matthews felt a chill run down her spine.
Miss Caldwell, are you telling me that fear of losing your job prevented you from properly supervising Prince George? No. Caldwell turned sharply, tears now visible in her eyes. It's not that simple. There are influences in this household that you don't see. People who have their own agendas, their own ideas about how things should be handled. What influences? Before Caldwell could answer, there was a sharp knock on the library door. David Morrison, the head of security, entered without waiting for permission. His presence seemed to fill the room, and Matthews noticed how Patricia Caldwell immediately fell silent. Inspector Matthews, Morrison's voice was carefully controlled. I apologize for interrupting, but there's been a development in the investigation that requires immediate attention.
Matthews stood, her instincts telling her that Morrison's timing was not coincidental.
What kind of development, Mr. Parati? Morrison? Prince George has asked to speak with you. He says he remembers more about what happened. The three adults made their way through the palace corridors to the private family quarters, where Prince George was recovering in his bedroom. The 10-year-old was sitting up in bed, his left arm in a bright blue cast that had been signed by his siblings in colourful markers. Prince George, Matthews said gently, settling into a chair beside his bed. Your father tells me you remember some additional details about your accident. George looked past Matthews to where Morrison and Caldwell stood by the door. Are they going to stay? Matthews followed his gaze and noticed the subtle but unmistakable look that passed between the two adults. Would you prefer they didn't? The boy nodded solemnly. Please. Morrison stepped forward. Your Royal Highness, as head of security, I should remain present during any interview. Mr. Morrison, Matthews said firmly, this is a formal police investigation. I'll determine who needs to be present. She turned to both adults. Please wait outside. After they left, Prince George seemed to relax slightly. Inspector, I didn't tell Papa everything because I was scared I would get people in trouble. Matthews felt her heart rate increase. What people, Your Highness? Miss Patricia and Mr. Morrison were both in the garden with me, George said quietly. They were having an argument about something, and Miss Patricia was upset. She kept looking at her phone and seemed worried. What were they arguing about? I couldn't hear all of it, but Miss Patricia kept saying something about pictures and money. Mr. Morrison told her she was being stupid and that she needed to be more careful. Matthews felt pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. What happened next? Miss Patricia said I should play on the climbing frame while they finished talking. She said I should try to reach the very top because I was getting so big and strong. But she wasn't really watching me. She was still looking at her phone. The implications were staggering. And when you fell, Mr. Morrison ran over and told me that I should say I was playing alone if anyone asked. He said it would be better for everyone if I kept it simple.
George's young face was troubled. But Papa always taught me to tell the truth. So when he asked me directly, I had to tell him what really happened.
Matthews spent another 20 minutes with Prince George, carefully documenting every detail of his account.
By the time she left his room, she had a clear picture of what had occurred, and it was far worse than a simple case of negligence. Her next stop was Prince William's private office, where she found him pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. The moment she entered, he stopped and fixed her with an intense stare. "Inspector, please tell me you have answers." Matthews took a deep breath. "Your Royal Highness, I believe your son's accident was the result of a deliberate distraction while Miss Caldwell was engaged in activities that violated her employment terms and potentially the law." William's face went white. "What activities went on?" "Based on Prince George's account and my observations during the interviews, I believe Miss Caldwell was using her access to the royal family to sell private information or photographs to outside parties. David Morrison appears to have discovered this and was attempting to manage the situation when the accident occurred." The silence in the room was deafening. William slowly sank into his chair, the full betrayal of trust hitting him like a physical blow. "You're telling me that my son was injured because his nanny was selling stories about our family?" "That's my preliminary assessment, yes. Both adults were so focused on their own crisis that they failed to properly supervise Prince George, and then they conspired to cover up their negligence." William's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. Your Royal Highness, I need your permission to conduct a full investigation of both individuals, including their personal finances, communications, and any contacts with media organizations." William stood, and Matthews saw in his face the transformation from concerned father to future king. "Inspector Matthews, you have my complete authorization to investigate every aspect of this betrayal. I want to know exactly what information has been sold, to whom, and for how long. Then I want criminal charges filed against anyone who put my children at risk for their own profit." As Matthews left the palace for the second time, she knew that her investigation had uncovered something far more serious than a playground accident. The broken arm was just the visible symptom of a much deeper sickness within the royal household, one that had put the entire family at risk and would require radical surgery to cure. The next 24 hours would bring revelations that would shock even her experienced investigative team, and Prince William would be forced to make decisions that would fundamentally reshape how the royal family protected itself from those who would betray their trust for profit. The dawn of the third day brought Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews back to Scotland Yard with a team of digital forensics experts and a stack of court orders that would allow her to examine every aspect of Patricia Caldwell and David Morrison's private lives. What they discovered in the following hours would exceed even her worst expectations about the scope of the betrayal. The digital examination of Caldwell's personal devices revealed a systematic operation that had been running for over 18 months. Her smartphone contained encrypted messaging apps connected to 3 separate media contacts, thousands of photographs taken without permission throughout the royal residences, and detailed notes about the family's private routines, medical appointments, and personal conversations. Detective Sergeant James Parker, the team's digital specialist, briefed Matthews on the most damaging evidence. "Inspector, this goes far beyond selling the occasional story to the tabloids. Caldwell has been conducting surveillance on the entire family. We found recording devices hidden in her clothing, software that could capture conversations through her phone even when it appeared to be turned off, and GPS tracking of the royal family's movements." Matthews felt sick as she reviewed the evidence. "How much information are we talking about?" "Over 40,000 individual files, ma'am. Photos, audio recordings, video clips, and detailed written reports. Everything from the children's bedtime stories to private conversations between the Prince and Princess of Wales about family finances and security concerns. The implications were staggering. Not only had Prince George been injured due to Caldwell's negligence, but the entire family had been living under covert surveillance for over a year. The breach of privacy was so complete and systematic that it constituted a serious threat to national security. "What about Morrison?" Matthews asked. Parker's expression darkened. "That's where it gets worse, Inspector. Morrison wasn't trying to stop Caldwell's activities. He was her business partner. We found evidence of payments from the same media contacts to accounts linked to Morrison. He was providing security schedules, advance notice of family travel, and detailed information about the palace's security systems. Matthews had investigated many betrayals of trust in her career, but the calculated nature of this conspiracy was particularly chilling. How much money were they making? Conservative estimate, over £200,000 in the past 18 months. They were planning to expand their operation to include Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis as they got older. We found draft contracts with media outlets for exclusive access to the children's developmental milestones. The evidence was overwhelming, but Matthews knew that her work was only beginning. She needed to present these findings to Prince William and help him understand the full scope of what had been done to his family. More importantly, she needed to ensure that the legal response was swift and comprehensive enough to prevent similar betrayals in the future. She returned to Kensington Palace that afternoon to find Prince William waiting with Princess Catherine, who had cut short her official engagements to return home. The princess looked exhausted, her usual composure replaced by the raw emotion of a mother whose children had been exploited by people she trusted. "Inspector Matthews," Catherine spoke first, her voice tight with controlled anger. "William has told me what you've discovered. I need to understand exactly what these people have done to our family." Matthews had prepared for this conversation, but delivering the news was still one of the most difficult briefings of her career. She methodically laid out the evidence, the hidden recordings, the photographed private moments, the detailed surveillance reports, and the systematic violation of the family's most intimate spaces. With each revelation, William's expression grew harder, while Catherine's face showed the progression from shock to heartbreak to fury. When Matthews finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. 18 months, William finally said, his voice hollow. George's first day at his new school, Charlotte's birthday party, Louis learning to ride his bike, all of it recorded and sold for profit. Catherine stood and walked to the window, her hands shaking. They watched my children sleep, William. They recorded their nightmares and their bedtime prayers and sold them to tabloid newspapers. Matthews had rarely seen such raw pain in her years of police work. Your Royal Highnesses, I want you to know that both Patricia Caldwell and David Morrison will face serious criminal charges. The Crown Prosecution Service is prepared to pursue charges including fraud, breach of trust, violation of privacy laws, and child endangerment. That's not enough, William said quietly, and Matthews heard in his voice a resolution that would reshape the entire royal household. Inspector, I want you to conduct a complete security review of everyone who has access to our family. Every staff member, every security officer, every person who enters our homes. I want background checks that go back to their childhood, psychological evaluations, and regular polygraph examinations. Catherine turned from the window, and I want new protocols for anyone who works with our children. Surprise inspections, random device searches, and continuous monitoring of their communications while they're on duty. Matthews nodded. Those are reasonable precautions, Your Royal Highnesses. But I should warn you that such measures will fundamentally change the atmosphere of your household. Good, William replied without hesitation. The atmosphere of trust and family warmth nearly got my son seriously injured and exposed all of our children to exploitation. If the price of their safety is a less comfortable environment for the staff, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. The following weeks brought swift justice for the conspirators. Patricia Caldwell pled guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, along with a complete ban from working with children. David Morrison fought the charges, but was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 5 years, with additional charges pending related to his breach of national security protocols. The media outlets that had purchased the stolen information faced their own legal consequences, with several major publications agreeing to substantial financial settlements rather than face criminal prosecution. The total amount recovered exceeded £900,000, which Prince William directed should be donated to children's privacy protection charities, but the real transformation came in the comprehensive security overhaul that followed. William worked personally with Matthews and security experts from MI5 to develop protocols that would prevent such betrayals in the future. Every staff member underwent extensive revetting, new technological safeguards were installed throughout all royal residences, and a new position was created, Director of Family Security, answerable directly to Prince William, rather than to the traditional palace hierarchy. The changes extended beyond security measures. William instituted regular one-on-one meetings with every person who worked closely with his children, created anonymous reporting systems for staff to raise concerns about their colleagues, and established clear consequences for any breach of the family's privacy, no matter how minor. Most significantly, he implemented what became known as the George Protocol, named after his eldest son's experience. Under this system, no adult would ever be alone with any of the royal children without at least one other verified staff member present, and any injury or incident involving the children would trigger an automatic, independent investigation. Princess Catherine took the lead on establishing new training programs for royal household staff, focusing on the psychological impact of privacy violations on children and the long-term consequences of betraying a child's trust. She personally interviewed every candidate for positions involving the children and made it clear that the previous culture of casual access would never return. The investigation's conclusion brought a mixture of relief and lasting change to the royal household. Prince George's arm healed completely, but the experience had changed him in ways that would take longer to recover. He became more reserved around new staff members and often asked his parents detailed questions about the people who worked in their home. 6 months after the initial incident, Matthews conducted her final review of the new security protocols. She found a household that was undoubtedly safer, though markedly different from the relatively open environment that had existed before. The price of protecting the royal family's privacy had been the loss of some of the informal warmth that had characterized their home life. "Inspector," Prince William said during their final meeting, "do you think we've overcorrected? Have we made our home too much like a fortress?" Matthews considered the question carefully. "Your Royal Highness, you've created an environment where your children can grow up without fear that their most private moments will be exploited for profit. That seems like the most important consideration. George still asks me sometimes why Miss Patricia had to go away. I tell him that she broke the rules about keeping families safe, but I don't think he fully understands what happened." "Perhaps that's for the best," Matthews replied. "He's young enough that this experience might fade from his memory, replaced by years of genuine security and trust." As Matthews left Kensington Palace for the final time in her official capacity, she reflected on the case that had revealed how even the most protected family in Britain could be vulnerable to betrayal from within. The broken arm of one 10-year-old prince had exposed a web of exploitation that reached into the highest levels of the royal household, but it had also triggered reforms that would protect not just this generation of royal children but those yet to come. The investigation had taken less than a month to complete, but its impact would be felt for decades. Prince William's unprecedented demand for custody reform had resulted in the most comprehensive security overhaul in modern royal history, ensuring that the trust placed in those who served the royal family would never again be so carelessly betrayed. Most importantly, Prince George and his siblings would grow up in a household where their safety and privacy were protected by multiple layers of security, verification, and oversight. The price of their father's vigilance was a less trusting world, but it was a price that William had decided was worth paying to ensure that his children would never again be vulnerable to those who would exploit them for profit. William orders custody as Royal Guard uncovers those responsible for breaking Prince George's arm.